Hi, I'm Michael Levin, and welcome to Bookline. Our show today features our guest, David Hancock, who is the founder and publisher and CEO of Morgan James Publishing. David is the publisher with the fastest growing, or one of the fastest growing, independent book publishers in the country, and he's been his company's been 5 times in the last 5 years one of the top 10 fastest growing publishers on Publishers Weekly list of fastest growing publishers. And David, welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you so much, Michael. It's a privilege to be here. Such a great turnout for us coming up to Boston and getting some time together, that's for sure.
Well, it just worked out really well. You're based in Virginia.
I am. We're actually a Virginia limited liability company with authority in New York, and great story about the whole New York aspect. So we founded ourselves in 2003 in Virginia, and things were going wonderful, but as a business book publisher initially, we wondered, you know, who wants to be published by a Virginia publisher when you really should be published by a New York house? So we set up authority in New York, opened up an office in Long Island, because that's all we could afford at the time, and everything doubled. So that perception is everything in the publishing world.
It's really cool. Well, let's talk about that. I mean, the New York book publishing industry has basically fallen off a cliff.
Yeah.
Why, and can they find their way back?
You know, I think the only way that they can find their way back, and we'll talk about why in a second, is I think they just need to go back to their roots and realize that they're not the most important. We as publishers aren't the most important part of the process anymore. It's the author, it's the talent. Without them, we've got nothing. And I think publishers forgot that maybe centuries ago, but I know certainly a long time ago.
So my understanding is that one of the publishers, the major publishers in New York, the Simon & Schusters, the Random Houses, one of their reactions to the 2007 recession was essentially to try to commoditize writing and to stop having to pay authors large sums of money for books. And that way they would reduce their costs, reduce their risks. But the problem is that when you turn writing into a commodity, you get generic writing, you get bad books. Am I wrong?
No, you're absolutely right. And then also you get a book that nobody's promoting. You can buy advertising all you want, but people just don't want to buy books. Now, you certainly don't hear publishers say that very often, but the reality is we don't want to buy books. We want to find people that we can trust and love and recognize that they're authorities in their space, and once that they've earned our respect and earned the right, then we'll buy anything they have. And a book is a great way to start that process. It's the least expensive part of their funnel into their lives, but it's also the most respected part.
No, it's really true. And today people have so much ADD and ADHD that the idea of finishing reading a book is hard enough. The idea of actually writing one kind of blows people's minds.
I know, right? According to Publishers Weekly, 70% of the buyers only finish 30% of the books. You've got to catch their attention. And of course, in an entrepreneurial publishing world, you've got to get them out of the book and into your life, whether it's via the website or via social media or at live events, because it's the only way that you're really going to take your message to where they'll actually use it and implement it, or from an entrepreneurial sense as well, the only way that you'll be able to monetize what you're doing beyond the book.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, David, I want to ask you a question. I've got a theory. I'm excited that you're here so I can run it past you. My sense is that prior to the internet, publishers had a hammerlock on, follow me on this, hammerlock on the distribution of books, because you would only buy a book in a bookstore before Amazon. And they had a hammerlock on the marketing of books, because the only way you'd buy a book was if you saw it reviewed. And then once book reviews started to disappear because newspapers got smaller or went away, and once Amazon basically crowded out all but Barnes & Noble and a handful of privately owned bookstores, once that happened, suddenly publishers were exposed. They really never knew how to market books in the first place. Do you buy that?
Oh, absolutely. They know how to buy advertising. They know how to hire PR firms to try to generate some buzz, but it's more than that. Especially today, it's more than just buying advertising space or trying to get shown up on the right TV show. It's about engagement. It's about that relationship that is perceived in the beginning with that audience and that reader, and then of course that authority. Of course, authors knew it all along. That's why they always thrived as speakers. But even publishers like to limit the authors in times past by how many books they can actually buy themselves. They want all the books to go through the bookstores and just kind of leaving the author out on their own.
Tell me the story you told me yesterday without mentioning the name of the author or the publisher, and you know what I'm talking about. Go ahead.
All right, so in our early days, we were growing up and trying to figure out our space, but we were very fortunate to capture the attention of a number of significant authors who were significant in their space. And one of them, we published a book that was similar to a book that they had published with another publisher, a large house. In fact, he was a #1 best-selling author for that publisher, and he was setting up live events to go along with with the concept of the book, which makes perfect sense.
Sure.
You obviously want to sell books in the back of the room. You want to create demand for the audience. You want to get them into your funnel. But he called up the publisher when he realized that he was out of books. Now, this is their #1 best-selling author in this space. He calls up his editor and says, "Hey, this is John Doe, and I'm looking to buy some books because I got an event coming up here soon." And the editor actually hesitated and didn't really know who he was. And after a few minutes, he realized, okay, this is so-and-so author. He's the author of this particular book. Of course, that really bothered the author, as you can imagine. And then he realized, okay, well, what do you want? He said, well, I've got a live event coming up, and I need to buy some books. He said, okay, let's see. Well, sir, I'm sorry, you've bought all the books that you can buy at your author discounted rate, so you'll have to buy them at retail. In other words, go to Barnes & Noble to buy your book. Couldn't even help you there. And of course, that infuriated the author because he probably knew it was in the agreement, but didn't really think he'd ever hit up against it, or if they would actually hold him to it. But the reality is they did. And then after that conversation kind of went on for a few minutes, the editor said, "Well, what are you doing again? Because we own the rights to this work. You shouldn't be doing anything on the content of this work without getting our permission, and certainly without monetizing it with us." So after about a half-hour talk, he got them to agree to revenue share. He could still do the event, but when he hung up, he realized that just isn't right. He just thought, man, this is really just restrictive, and it was frustrating to death. One, that he didn't know who he was. Two, that he couldn't buy any more books at a decent price. And three, he had to revenue share when he hadn't planned on it. So he called up us and said, gave me the story, and we laughed about it frustratingly together, and he realized, well, we could just not buy the books from them, buy the book that we had done, which is a similar concept, but more of a business spin. And the event was a massive success. Of course, we wanted to ship him 500 books in a heartbeat because we wanted to support him, because the more successful the author is, the more successful the publisher is. We learned that a long time ago.
I think that's something New York forgot. Now let's take a look at this from the author's perspective, because I think a lot of people watching this program would like to be published authors themselves. It used to be that the value of going to a New York major publisher, Simon & Schuster, Random House, HarperCollins, whomever,
right, was
the imprimatur on the spine of the book, and then the fact that the book would be available in bookstores, and then the fact that the publisher, in theory, would do some marketing for the book, would do something to get the book out. And when I was a new author in the late 80s, they got me on TV shows, they got me on radio shows, they did stuff.
You were one of the fortunate ones.
I was. So today, the publisher, the imprimatur, the name on the spine is probably not the name of the publisher, it's the name of an imprint in that house, sort of a sub-brand of that house. The publisher's going to do no marketing.
Right.
They're going to probably pay a very small advance, if any advance at all, $5,000 and under, and sometimes zero advance. Oh, you'll make it up on the back end. So and then you've got to wait a year and a half for the book to come out.
Right.
So the question becomes, of what value is it to an author to seek a deal with a major house today?
Yeah, well, fortunately for us, and unfortunately for the author, there's still recognition with a major brand. Now, the reality is, consumers don't really care about the publishing house. Doesn't care who published book, as long as they can get access to great content and good author. They do like to have the respected brand that they know the quality is going to be good or it's been vetted. So that's important. But the publisher does bring to the house the third-party validation. Yes, this book has been validated. This author has been vetted. This good quality content, and of course the credibility of only a handful of books published by that particular house. But most of that stuff really just means more to us than it does the consumer themselves. So really, with distribution, just about anybody can set up their own house and start distributing by hiring, a independent distributor or a wholesaler to try to help them out. It's the relationships with the bookstores. It's kind of some of that old school paths that are in place that help makes publishing survive. So it's becoming less and less, but there's still an important aspect for publishers. But again, the consumer doesn't care. So you have to really figure out, well, what can I do to market the book? What can I do to take it beyond what I know the publishers are going to do? And you're right, most publishers don't do enough. We don't even do enough. But unless they're spending top dollars, I'm talking millions of dollars in advances, they're not even going to book a radio show for you. It's just going to fall on your shoulders. So the sooner an author realizes that it's really going to be on their shoulder, no matter how they publish the book, whether they self-publish or to go with one of the big houses, they need to take ownership with it. But the distribution channels and the respect and the credibility that's associated with a brand certainly does help. But even that's changing as we go along.
Right. You're talking about the brand names of the publishers, and to me this is something that fascinates me. You look at the brand names of car manufacturers, Honda or GM or Ford. Now the car manufacturers and the book publishers, many of them kind of all started at the same time. They all started in the earlier part of the 20th century.
Right.
Or sometimes some of the publishers even earlier. But the thing is that all of the brands of car manufacturers are household names, whereas the average book reader really doesn't know what Simon & Schuster stands for as a book, or what Farrar Straus stands for as a book publisher, or Random House, or why one particular house might have a better reputation for one kind of book than another.
Right.
To me, doesn't it seem like an enormous failure on the part of the publishing houses to promote their brands as brands, so that people would say, oh, that's a Simon & Schuster book, I know it's going to be good?
You know, you're absolutely right. But what happened years ago, I mean, years and years ago, they got so fat and so used to making so much money and controlling the entire industry that now they're all scrambling. It's more, I think we talked a little bit about this yesterday, it's more of a publishing arena now where they publish as many books as they can and just pray one or two of them take off, because that's how they're paying the bills. So they've lost their identity in many cases. Very few publishers you can kind of recognize, okay, that publisher or that brand publishes this type of books. If I could say a name, for instance, like Entrepreneur Press, focuses primarily on books to help people start their own business from an entrepreneur perspective. Clear and simple, pretty good. Right. Most of the brands you have no clue, unless it's a, well, gracious, even the textbook publishers publish across many different genres. So it's very diluted, and you're right, nobody has a clue, and the more they do it, the harder it is for that brand to maintain that recognition.
Well, what you're talking about now goes to what I consider the passivity of the major houses, and I don't mean to spend the whole time together bashing the major houses,
we
but
love them.
I think a certain amount of time, a certain amount of bashing is appropriate. So basically, the way publishers work is that they sort of sit there and they wait and see what literary agents send to them,
right.
And that's different from pretty much every other type of industry in the world. Car manufacturers don't just sit there and say, well, let's wait and see what the market wants and then we'll produce it.
In a year.
In a year. That's what Henry Ford said. If we went to the market, they'd tell us they just wanted faster horses.
Right.
So the publishers are passive. They have to sit and wait. And the thing that entertains me is that any time an editor gets a big position at a new house, and you cannot get a raise in publishing. The only way you can make more money is by jumping to another house. So they'll make a jump to another house, and they always say the same thing. We've got to figure out what our brand is going to stand for. Mm-hmm. And every single time somebody gets a new job in publishing, they say that exact same sense. We're going to figure out what our brand stands for. But ultimately what their brand stands for is waiting to see what the agents send in and then sort of buying whatever seems like the best of that. Is that your opinion too?
Absolutely. And of course, it happens all the time. I compare publishing to the car salesman who always jump and ship from one dealership to another. And every time you do so, you start a whole new relationship, you start a whole new process, and the same name's not there. They get fired for the craziest reasons, the editors and the publishers, so they're always in flux. In fact, we had an author that we had a huge success with at our house, #1 New York Times bestseller, ended up getting picked up by another large brand, and things didn't go really well. It happens in publishing, but you hate to see it any time. But things didn't go quite as well as the publisher had expected, so they fired the publisher of that imprint and fired the editor of that imprint. The author was orphaned for almost 2 years, and then somebody new came in, didn't have a clue who this author was, realized, hey, he's late on his next manuscript that he was demanded to write, and tried to start that new relationship with a new name, no relationship whatsoever, and it just crumbled to pieces. But that happens all the time.
Yeah, the thing that I hear over and over again from authors is how burned they feel. They went into the publishing relationship with a major house.
What relationship? I think they lost that part a long time ago.
Well, that's the thing.
Perceived relationship.
They go in looking for a relationship, and then they find that they're not going to have one.
Right.
Because the editor is fired, leaves to get another job somewhere else. I mean, is there really a future? I mean, just to step back and take a look at the big picture, is there a future for the traditional New York book publishing model?
You know, it's a good question. I don't know. The way they're acting, it seems like there may very well not be too much longer. Independent houses that are growing and rising and taking over in spaces is probably going to be more and more. I see a future of publishing with a bunch of small houses that are tightly niched, that are extremely successful, and then they'll have the same distribution that the big guys has. We'll be able to do it a whole lot more affordable. We'll be able to be more profitable in lower numbers, and we can tailor to that niche a whole lot easier. Recently, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal, I won't tell you when or how long ago, that the CEO of a publisher said, whew, we made it through that last hiccup thing. Now things are going to be the exact same. Nothing, same as usual. We're going to keep on chugging along. Publishing is surviving. No changes. I laughed and I cried at the same time.
Yeah.
They've got to get back to the roots of realizing that the content is king, the author is king, and of course you've got to compel the audience to fall in love with you and buy the books.
You know, in 2007, I saw the same kind of story. The CEO of one of the top publishers in New York, and I'm not going to mention his name, said in the Wall Street Journal, which is sort of the graveyard for publishing careers, we've been through recessions like this before. We went through it in the 70s. Soon we'll be all out there having lunch again. And the reality is that things have changed.
Yeah.
You can now go on Amazon and sell books, and you've got a level playing field with the major houses. And at the same time, the American attention span has shriveled.
Yeah.
And people just don't want to read books. They can get, I mean, I was in the public library not too long ago, and I was going through the biography section just because I like to read biographies, and there are 5 biographies of Lady Di, Princess Diana, and they're all 400 pages long, and they're caked with dust. And as God is my judge, they will never be taken out of the library again.
Right.
And the town is basically paying to heat them, cool them, and dust them. But for what? Because if anybody even wants to know about Princess Di, they'll just go on Wikipedia and read a paragraph.
Yeah.
People don't want to read 400 pages today.
No, not at all. In fact, the bookstores have been telling us since about 2008, the consumer habits have changed. They want shorter books. They want more affordable books. They want smaller books they can just throw in their briefcase or their purse a whole lot easier. And of course, if you look at the publishing of books since 2008, you know, a lot of publishers were still doing 300-page hardcovers like they've been doing for decades, because that's what they've always done. But those actually got up to 90% return rate from the bookstores. We started doing primarily paperback books to the bookstores. Our sales were growing like crazy during the recession. We were selling more books during the recession than we had our entire existence at that point, because we were doing affordable, shorter paperback books with a lower price. Makes sense. Yeah,
at my company at Business Coast, we mostly do books that are 65 to 125 pages. And in years past, I mean, just 10 years ago, you wouldn't even call something that long a book.
Right.
I don't know what you would have called it, sort of somewhere between a pamphlet and a book. But today, if it's bound nicely and attractively, kind of a Morgan James approach, it looks like a book, it feels like a book.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to get people to buy into your ideas, whether it's your philosophy of whatever, or you're a financial advisor and you're trying to get them to come on board with you, if you cannot close them in 65 to 100 pages, you're not going to close them in 200.
Certainly not 400.
Certainly not. No, and it used to be biggest book won.
Yeah.
And whoever wrote the biggest book was probably, you know, you think about just in terms of financial advice books. In the 70s, my grandmother adhered to Sylvia Porter's money book, 700 pages long.
Wow.
And then in the 80s, you had Wealth Without Risk, Charles M. Givens. And that was 400 pages with copious notes in the back. And now it's Dave Ramsey. It's 200 plus pages, but half of it is pictures and charts and graphs.
Right.
So the word count has gone from, you know, 120,000 down to 50,000
right.
or shorter. People just don't want to read words today. It's crazy.
Yeah. Even still, you've got to spread the content out. You've got to make it very skimmable, because it's an actual process before they even buy the book in the first place. You know, they'll look at the cover, the title, all those things are kind of, you know, subtle, but if you can get them to the back cover, maybe they'll get to the table of contents, and if they start skimming through the book, if it looks like just too much block text, you'll scare them away.
Yeah. It just reminds me, I want to go back to one thing we were talking about a moment ago, about how publishers can't change. I did a book with Dave Pottruck, who was Charles Schwab's CEO in the 90s. He took them, Dave took Schwab onto the internet for the first time back then. And we just did a book recently called Stacking the Deck, which was a New York Times bestseller. And one of Dave's points is that in organizations, in any large organization, there is an enormous antipathy or aversion to change, because change reduces the value of the experience and know-how of every member of the organization to zero.
Right.
So even though it might be in the best interest of the organization to change, individuals within that organization, from the bottom to the top, will do everything they can to resist that change, because they don't want to be left behind or tossed overboard. Do you see that as a condition in the New York publishing houses today?
Oh, I do. I mean, absolutely. They've got thousands and thousands of people working for a lot of these houses, and a manager or an editor or a team leader might be afraid of their own job, certainly, but they're also afraid of letting go their 15 people that are working on these projects when you just don't need that many people anymore, especially when they're not doing anything anymore. They're spending all their time on the ones or twos that they're publishing and not enough time on the rest of them. Yeah, and I think that the fear of change is the biggest, even from the size of the book to when they release books and how they release books, the seasons. They've been doing it the same way they've been doing it for decades. The change just terrifies them. Yeah,
and at the same time, they're selling fewer books, prices are dropping. One of the things people thought was that ebooks would be the savior of the publishing industry,
right.
And I think it's the opposite. I think what's going on today is that the people who get, and tell me if I'm wrong, the people, it's kind of fun for me to test my, I sort of sit in a room alone, and now I've got you to test my theories on. But with ebooks, today, the people who get deals with New York publishers are the ones who have really large followings on social media, or doing tons and tons of keynotes, or they're already on the networks on a regular basis. Now, the people who create really great content have not taken the time to build up their platform, so they're not getting the deals. Is that accurate?
No, it's absolutely accurate. It's a catch-22 because nothing gives you, that authority and that space in the beginning of that platform better than a book does. But oftentimes you can't get the attention of an editor or an agent without already having all those things in place.
Right. Yeah. Agents won't even look at you if you don't have the solid platform.
Right.
So what you're seeing today, I think, is you're seeing books where you've got one chapter or two chapters of solid material,
right.
And then 10 or 11 chapters that follow that are just hamburger helper. So if you buy a book, you can put it on your bookshelf in your home or your office and look imposing and smart. But if you buy it, even if you don't read it, or even if 90% of it is garbage,
right.
The thing is that with an ebook, it's obvious that if it's no good, people are going to tell just from picking it up, and after a chapter or two, that the thing just doesn't have any
right.
merit. And then at that point, what are they going to say to themselves? They're going to say, this is no good. So I really believe that ebooks are actually the continuing death of publishing, because they're exposing the weakness of the books that the major publishers are publishing today. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. It really does. And you're right. The ebooks got exciting when the technology got a little bit more exciting, and the sales of the ebooks kind of picked up a little bit, but they didn't go anywhere, and they settled down. Now they're starting to fall back down again. And it's all about the content. You've just got to deliver great content. People thought I could do my 700-page manuscripts in an ebook format because nobody really realized how long it is. It's a whole lot easier to carry, a whole lot easier to read, but still, most of it's not as good as quality as the guys who are out there hustling in the field who have the experience to write that book.
Yeah, and this is not to say that one big book doesn't break through, like Thomas Piketty, Capital, last year. It's 400 or 500 pages, sort of required reading if you were smart. I'm not that smart. I haven't read it. But every so often one big book breaks through. But by and large, that's just not where the world is today.
It's not. No, not at all.
So what are the advantages of going with an independent house? Why would an author basically turn his or her back on the traditional, I'm going to get an agent, I'm going to get a major publisher route? Why would they do that today?
Well, it used to be they were afraid to make that jump from a larger house because of the advance, but the advances are less than $500 average now. And then it was the distribution. Well, most small houses can get the same distribution as some of the larger houses. So it really is about the attention that they can get or the extras they can get. Now, we're a small publisher. We got 40 people working for us. We publish about 140 books a year. We have time to give the attention to the authors to make sure we're delivering quality books. And of course, we need to make money. So the more we can do to help the authors leverage the book, the more successful they are, the more money we're going to make. So authors are looking for that. They're looking to have a relationship with a publisher who's not just one of 17,000 books they're publishing that year. Some of the numbers are crazy. There are a couple of imprints in some of the larger houses that were literally published 1,200 books this year, and there's not even that much room in a bookstore. I mean, it's kind of crazy. So they're looking for the relationship. They're looking to be felt special and have their hand held and help them figure out what they need to do, not only to sell books, but also how to leverage that book. So they're looking for that out, but they still need the credibility of a recognized brand for the media, because the publishing brand often is a scrubbing tool for the press, and they're also looking for the distribution to find that one client that discovers them at the airport bookstore, that never would have heard of this person anywhere else in the world. So all those things tied together, you've got to have the relationship to put it all together.
I'm not convinced that major publishers really think they need to make money. And I'll tell you why I believe this. most of them, or pretty much all the major publishers are owned, it used to be Simon & Schuster. It used to be there was a guy named Simon and a guy named Schuster.
Right.
One of them had a daughter named Carly, another story. But Simon & Schuster, these two guys got together in the 20s and started selling books on crossword puzzles because that was the new craze. And there was today there's Holt. Well, there was a man named Henry Holt,
yeah.
and it was his house. And Bennett Cerf had Random House, and it was sort of the era of elbow patches. And these guys went into book publishing because they loved book publishing. They had to make money because they didn't have a big corporate safety net. And now you look at the publishing industry, and you've got Simon & Schuster is owned by Viacom, which is CBS. You've got Bantam Doubleday Dell, it's owned by Bertelsmann, which is a huge German thing. You've got Random House, it's owned by Hachette, which is French. You've got HarperCollins, which is owned by News Corp, which is Australian, which is Rupert Murdoch. You've basically got the 5 or 6 major publishers owned by 5 or 6 multinationals, which means that 6 people, the CEOs of these companies around the world, really control the publishing of 85 to 90%. 6 individuals control 90% of the books that come out worldwide.
Isn't that crazy?
It's just insane.
Yeah. And you're right, the deep pockets, they got money, they have other ways of making money. Each one of these little pieces, it seems like they could care less if they make money, but you know who the losers are? The shareholders. All these companies, most of these companies are publicly traded. I'll give you one example without saying names. During our most recent recession, 2008, there's an old house that's been around for hundreds of years, or at least 200 years, that was struggling with the changes with the new economy, and now they're still doing the same as ever. And they took an $80 million write-off on their taxes, and it was against their shareholders, and that's the only way they survived. But then yet they kept doing the same thing over and over again. In fact, I think they even did an article, I can't remember what paper it was, that talked about, whew, we made it through. Our shareholders we shareholders, they said, took a hit, but we're going to continue doing business the way we've always done it.
Which means to say we're going to keep our offices, our salaries, and our perks the way we've always done that.
Our big buildings, that's
and
right.
our big buildings, and the hell with the readers, the hell with the writers, and the hell with the shareholders.
That's right.
And that's sort of the business model. Well, I don't think that's fair.
I know, right?
I don't think. I don't think it's sustainable. I mean, I've done at least a dozen, maybe 15 or 20 books of my own with the major houses, and I don't see. With all due respect to me as a writer, I don't know why they publish my stuff, because they don't go out and market it. It's all on me. So if Ford, to go back to the automaker analogy, if Ford or GM put a new car onto into the marketplace, they'll spend $1 billion to promote that brand. They're not going to create 1,000 different cars and push them out into the market and see if somebody buys one of them.
Right.
So only
colossal waste of money.
It just is.
And the losers are the authors who are writing these books, as well as the readers who are getting less than good content.
Yeah. So I mean, this is why I'm a huge advocate of independent publishing and companies like yours. I have a company called Business Ghost. We ghostwrite books for anyone who has a positive message and needs to get a book out. And we've been partnering with you guys. This is the disclaimer part of the show, for the last 6 or 7 months, and
right.
we're seeing wonderful, wonderful results in terms of process and product. And I just think this is the wave of the future for people who need books. It's hard enough to get a literary agent to look at your stuff if you don't have a national platform.
Right.
And then even if you do, I've seen really big names I've worked with offered $0 to $5,000 advances. And I'm talking about mega stars in entertainment or business. And they've taken those advances because they just thought, well, I have no choice.
Right.
And a few years ago, or 10 years ago, let's say, they would have gotten $500,000 or $350,000 for that same book.
Right. Now, we've also seen some authors who get the large advances, who the numbers just don't make sense. I've got some friends who've gotten multiple 7-figure advances. Books have been selling well, but not enough to earn back that kind of money. So it's like, where in the world is all this money coming from? Who's actually making decisions in this process?
My understanding is that the editors and we've got to wrap up pretty soon, but is that the editors at the houses, the only way they can make a name for themselves is by overspending on a book, getting into Publishers Weekly as the person who spent $500,000 or $1 million on a particular book, and then as a result of that, they get so much attention that they're so hot that they can get a job and therefore a raise at another house. So there goes the shareholders' money one more way. So I'm looking at the clock. We're just about out of time. David, I truly appreciate you taking the time to come in and talk. It's been really a blast.
Oh, absolutely. It's so much fun. We could go on for hours, but that's just exciting for us, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody else cares, but the thing is that if you like books, this is the thing.
That's
So
right.
the show is called Bookline. We're going to be here at least twice a month here on Bookline Interactive. The idea is that we want to educate you and inform you about what's really going on in the publishing industry. And again, my name is Michael Levin. I run a company called Business Ghost. We ghostwrite books. If you're interested in the show or if you have a comment or a thought, write to me at michael@businessghost.com. And we look forward to seeing you again. David, thank you.
Thank you.
And as always, namaste.
Awesome.